these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths. We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome back, everybody. So we have a returning guest today, Toby Rice. He's president and CEO of EQT Energy, which is the largest producer of natural gas in the country. Sad to say it's not in Texas. This pains me every single time I talk to Toby, but apparently the largest producer is in Pennsylvania. We spoke 2 years ago about the role of U.S. natural gas in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, it's the best argument against the environment or for the environmentalists. And yet it's attacked at every angle, at every turn. We talked about how big of a role it could play if you actually had a concerted effort to increase exports and how that would displace dirty coal production around the world. So yeah, I haven't listened to that one. Look it up. Toby Rice, Dan Crenshaw. It's an older episode. It was pretty good, but a lot's changed since that time. We've gone the wrong direction. After the invasion of Ukraine, it seemed like there would be a new era of natural gas exports, given the fact that Russian natural gas needed to be displaced by American natural gas. And I think we promised the Europeans like a 60% increase in natural gas exports. And then recently, the Department of Energy puts a pause on new natural gas export terminals. So what the hell is going on? Toby, thanks for being on. How about we just start with a general overview, if you don't mind, of the commodity market with respect to natural gas, who's doing what, who makes what, who buys what, and what the trend lines are. And just give us that 101 real quick.
Sure. So natural gas is a form of energy that is used for primarily a few different purposes. Number one, it's used to make electricity. About a third of the natural gas is used to power our grid. Almost half of our electricity comes from natural gas. The other third is used for what we call industrials. This is taking natural gas and turning it into other products. Dan, how important is this? 4 pillars of modern society depend on natural gas: fertilizer, steel, cement, and plastics. So it's really important building block for those pillars. And then the last it's used for is residential heating and to some extent cooling. And so that's the other third. Now, I think one thing that's special about natural gas is based on the temperature and weather, the demand will fluctuate, increase and decrease over the course of the year. So it's obviously a lot more natural gas demand in the winter and the summer when the residential part is really moving. But just to give people a high level background on the natural gas market, I'd say since 2010, natural gas demand has grown 50%. That's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But during that same period of time, pipeline infrastructure has only grown 25% and storage infrastructure has only grown 12%. What does that mean? It means we have not built enough pipeline infrastructure, and we're going to still see parts of the U.S., unfortunately, cut off from the low-cost supplies of natural gas in this country. That means Americans are going to be unnecessarily paying higher prices for their energy because we don't have enough pipelines. And the storage impact, I think, is really important because that storage no longer is an effective way to balance the price of the supply-demand fundamentals. And what that means is price is going to balance the supply demand fundamentals. So you're going to see periods of time where natural gas prices are really low, like the point of time we're in today, where gas prices are closer to $2.50. And that happened because we had a very mild winter. And then on the other spectrum, you're going to see prices that are going to swing a lot higher. And the reason for that could be a geopolitical event. It could just be normal winter, and you could see natural gas prices go to that $6 to $8 range. The only structural thing I'd say that's really also been adding into the mix is this war on hydrocarbons has unfortunately caused us to rip out and replace a significant amount of coal off of our grids. And during prices of higher times for natural gas, people would switch gas with coal and that would help keep a lid on prices. Unfortunately, placing all this coal has put us more dependent on, natural gas. That's why it's even more important for us to get serious about making sure we have the right amount of infrastructure to be able to deliver this, incredibly life-saving commodity to the world.
Well, I want to just highlight one thing you said, which I thought was kind of a cool way to explain the use of fossil fuels, which is, and maybe I want you to unpack it a little bit. You mentioned it's used for four pillars of life. See if I remember them all. It was steel, it was cement, it was fertilizer, and it was, what was the other one? Plastic.
That's right.
So those are pillars of life. Worth noting that when we say steel and concrete, we mean basic infrastructure, roads, bridges, power lines, buildings that you can live in. Fertilizer, we mean food, and plastics. I mean, as bad a name as plastics have these days, they are kind of important. Maybe it's for advanced medical devices, maybe it's for clean drinking water. Our pipe infrastructure is made of PVC plastic, at least in Texas. It's in everything, and so I understand the concept of how oil and natural gas and oil resins get made into these kind of polymer resins in Texas, shipped off to be made into like plastic and injection molding plastic production in China, and then they come back into a plastic form. I understand how that works. Natural gas used in fertilizer, I'm not exactly sure how. When you say steel and cement, how does that? Does it literally is there actually an injection process that goes on in that manufacturing process, or do you mean just creating the heat necessary to build those things?
Yeah, specifically creating the heat required to make that. It's the most cost-effective way of applying industrial heat is with natural gas.
Yeah. What else is natural gas actually used to make? I mean, something that comes to mind is like rubber, or natural gas / oil. Let's just say fossil fuels. Rubber, right? Like I always point out the synthetic materials that people, the Patagonia loves to virtue signal against fossil fuels, and yet literally everything they make is a synthetic material that is a petroleum-based product. Am I right?
You are correct. They are a very big customer of oil and gas products.
So, all right. So that's the general overview. I mean, what do you make of this pause on natural gas exports? Like how is that affecting your business? Is it a short-term problem or more of a long-term problem? Let's unpack that.
Yeah, the LNG pause that got put in place a few months ago, that really hurt my feelings, to be honest with you, because as you know, we've been leading a crusade to unleash U.S. LNG to address people's concerns over rising emissions, and with the Russia-Ukraine situation, to be able to provide energy security to the world. And, people need to know that natural gas is the key to lowering global emissions and providing energy security to the world, to Americans, to our communities, to our way of life. And so I was very puzzled with the LNG pause, to be honest with you. But one of the reactions that people have had is they've asked me, they said, Toby, you've dedicated a lot of time promoting and advocating for unleashing US LNG. Like, how does this make you feel about how effective you've been? And my reaction is this. I think the fact that the environmentalists have put a focus on stopping LNG is a important point in showing people that we have been incredibly effective in advocating for why we should be unleashing US LNG. We've been making too much noise. It's been making too much sense. Yeah. But the other thing I think that's important to look at with the reaction to this LNG pause is we've seen leaders across both sides of the article of the aisle, bipartisan pushback on the president, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, saying that this is a bad idea. What that means is our leaders are getting educated and understand that natural gas is a decarbonizing force. Natural gas is the key to energy security to our allies, and security to our allies helps increase security to Americans, because the world can only contain so much chaos before it spills over and starts impacting Americans. So the world's security is our security. It's great to see the leaders step up and push back. You've seen the media, like places you wouldn't see pushing back, like the Washington Post, saying that this is a step backwards for climate. That's great to see. But most importantly, people say this was done as a political stunt.
Yeah.
And how are the people reacting? Well, in Pennsylvania, there was a really important poll that came out, and they asked Pennsylvania voters, and Pennsylvania matters because it's a swing state.
Yeah.
Said to the voters, would you, based on President Biden's decision to pause LNG, would you be more inclined to replace him or reelect him based on his stance? And by a margin of 2-1, Pennsylvania voters said that they would fire President Biden because of his decision to pause LNG rather than reelect him. I think that's an incredibly important point. People understand, Americans are starting to wake up and understand American energy dominance is American security. And it's something that we cannot be playing political games with.
Yeah, it's perplexing. It's not just this issue. There's a number of issues where I look at Democrats and I'm like, why would you take this? This is not a popular position. And the answer, look, is and then this happens on the right too. But the answer for them is they know that they need to excite their crazy base, because the crazy base is the one that actually comes out to vote, and they know that. I think that's why they've pulled the rug out from under Israel in many ways, to try and pander to a younger, kind of more anti-Israel Democratic base, also a large Muslim population in Michigan. And I think this is the same thing. They're trying to pander to an extremist, radical environmentalist base that doesn't represent even most Democrat voters. But the problem for politicians on both sides is that they know those people show up. And but it's great to see polls like that, because maybe that makes them change course.
Yeah.
How does it? But what does it mean though? Like on the ground, you're not stopping your exports, right? I think it's for new builds. Is that correct?
Yes, it would be for projects that haven't received permits yet. But listen,
but how many of those do you think are we now losing because of this? That investment has to go somewhere.
That's right. I mean, it's gonna delay our ability to get these facilities built. I mean, the international community has been very outspoken on this. We've got, I don't know exactly how the EU has their setup, but essentially a cabinet member for the EU.
No one does. I don't get it either.
Yeah, there's a cabinet member named Mark Sefcovic. He has come out and said, America is the global guarantor for energy security around the world. Like, people recognize America's position, and why this is so damaging for us is because, I used to go to all these customers. I've been in Europe talking to people and reassuring them when energy needs to be affordable, reliable, and clean. We all know that the energy we produce in America is the cleanest in the world. Cost is something that's easily describable, but from a reliability perspective, we're always able to say that not only are our shipments backed by the U.S. military, it's the most reliable transportation to make sure it gets to your shores. But the differentiating factor that we would tell people is we say, listen, with America, you're not going to wake up one day and have a dictator do something that's supplying you energy, do something that would cause you to not be able to take their energy deliveries.
Yeah. Extort you, threaten you with,
or just decide not to sell you energy. With America, this energy is coming from 1,000 different operators like EQT that are driven by market forces, not political forces. And President Biden came out and said he's going to do a political stunt. He sent a signal to the international community that actually maybe America isn't as driven by market forces as we thought, and it's now a political thing. This is probably the most damaging thing, that we need to send a message to our leaders that market forces need to have a stronger presence in the decisions that we're making. Yeah, and that's probably the biggest impact.
I like the way you frame that. It's and I think it's the proper way to frame it, because it's people, the defenders of this crazy policy, and frankly, there aren't that many, will say, look, it's just a pause. We're assessing. I don't know what's behind this, what do they call it? Like a social good or something, this kind of assessment that the DOE does in the public interest, right?
Yeah.
So in theory, if the DOE, here's my theory of if I don't think the DOE should really have a say over it, that should probably just be a FERC decision. But you would think that the Department of Energy would only look at something like this if, say, we were running out of natural gas, right? If we had such finite resources that we couldn't export anymore, That would be the only logical reason that I might see that a bigger government agency would say, "Hey, market forces, you can't do this because we're looking at our energy supply for the next 100 years. Like we should be that's our, as good stewards of the people, we look long term and we're thinking we need to actually hold on to some of this stuff."
Mhm.
That would make sense to me. But is that anywhere near what's going on here?
Yeah, the two concerns that were used to support this LNG ban, number one, the environmental argument was that methane emissions mean that it's natural gas is more higher emitting than coal. That's completely false, and that's been proven multiple times over. Natural gas is a decarbonizing force when used to replace coal. Methane emissions included, and we could talk about the progress the industry has made to knock methane emissions out of the park. EQT is a poster child on how easy and impactful we can do making progress on that front. But the other argument was an economic argument, and it was the question about do we have the resource to support this? What's this going to do to prices? Now, Dan, we can do a bunch of studies and do a lot of economic theories on how exports impact the local market. Or we could look at what the heck is actually happening in this world. We have never been exporting more LNG than we are today. And for the record, America is the world's largest LNG exporter, and we started exporting in 2016. A couple of years ago, we claimed the title of being the world's largest. And natural gas prices have never been lower. And so when we've stepped back and looked at the resource to support our Unleash US LNG campaign, when we looked at all of thanks to the shale revolution, all of the potential drilling projects, wells that have been identified but not yet drilled, we have the ability to quadruple our LNG exports and export up to 60 BCF a day. And we could support those volumes. And all we would need is a natural gas price around $4.
Yeah.
And to put that in perspective, 60 BCF a day is the energy equivalent of 10 million barrels a day of energy. And gas form is going to be a decarbonizing force.
A lot.
That is equivalent to adding a Saudi Arabia of clean energy to the world stage. It's tremendous. And $4 natural gas price, to put some color there, average price of natural gas over the last 20 years was $4.50.
Mm-hmm.
So at $4, Americans are still going to be getting a really great deal. And to put that in perspective to a price that people typically think about, the price of oil, $4 natural gas is the energy equivalent of $24 oil. What are we talking about? Having questions about the cost of natural gas, the most affordable energy in the world. And we have it in spades. We can unleash a Saudi Arabia worth of energy on the world stage.
Yeah. And we have enough for quite a long time, as I understand it, as far as our reserves go and our ability to frack into new wells. I mean, what does that look like as far as our own natural resources, whether that's onshore or offshore?
Well, so this is just looking, and these numbers that we said this production base would grow to is just looking at the dry gas areas. So we're not even including the Permian, which is a part of the country which produces about 18 BCF a day, about 18% of the natural gas. So taking that aside, when we ran these numbers, we said, what could we grow to? But under one condition, it's got to be reliable. It's got to be affordable. So you can only make these projects work with a gas price of $4. And from the reliability perspective, we said you can grow to a peak, but only high enough where you have enough undeveloped locations to hold that peak volume flat for over 30 years. Now, people will say, well, Tob, what happens after 30 years? Guess what? Like, can we get our act together when it comes to nuclear? And, natural gas is something that we could put on the field today. And people need to understand our natural gas resources is completely correlated to the price of natural gas. If natural gas prices increase, it's going to increase the amount of economic drillable locations.
Right.
So people's fear over running out of natural gas, even running out of affordable natural gas, are completely misplaced.
Let's talk about. Sorry, this is a shorter one, so I just want to hit some of the updates that have happened regulatorily speaking. One is the methane rule, the methane tax, and the methane rule. If we can go over that from the industry perspective, that'd be helpful. So just to be clear for the audience, these are methane tax was passed in the Inflation Reduction Act, implemented EPA. Methane rule is something separate, which sort of puts requirements on sensory equipment, I think, that you have to utilize. Again, some big companies have no problem with that. Smaller companies do. So maybe explain that for us.
Sure. So
What the heck is methane? Sorry. What is methane different from natural gas, or is it just a component of it? Like, what are we talking about when we think of methane?
yeah, methane, I don't know if you call it the chemical name. Methane is natural gas.
Same thing.
CH4 is what natural gas is. So, methane is more impactful to greenhouse gas, to global warming than say CO2. It's anywhere from 20 to 80 times more impactful. So it's a big issue. Now, methane emissions are essentially the natural gas that escapes during the drilling and the capturing of the natural gas, moving it through the pipelines, ultimately to consuming it. The EPA has put limits in place where if you are over a methane intensity level, so the amount of gas you produce versus the amount of methane that you emit, you will have to pay a penalty. Now, I will say this. Methane emissions are the biggest environmental concern that people have on our industry today. And that's good. And what we told Secretary Granholm is keep the bullseye on methane emissions, because this industry is going to knock methane emissions out of the park. What are we doing to address this? There's massive operational controls that are being put in place. For natural gas development, the biggest source of methane emissions comes from one piece of equipment. And that piece of equipment is called a pneumatic device. It's how we move fluids from the wellhead to other parts of the location. And that equipment can be replaced with cost-effective alternatives. At EQT, as an example, we were able to replace all 9,000 of our pneumatic devices. We did it in less than 18 months, and we did it for a cost of less than $30 million. And for perspective, that was a cost of less than $10 per ton of CO2 equivalent. So incredibly cost effective and incredibly meaningful. And we've lowered our methane emissions by over 70% from doing that one thing. And the good news is this is an opportunity that's available to others in industry, and industry is taking note, and they're doing this. Methane emissions in this industry since 2021 have already decreased over 23%. And we've got to address this as an industry, and I'm more confident now than ever that we will address this. Because we cannot let the emissions associated with making our product overshadow the emission reduction benefits when people use our product.
Also, you don't want to lose your product. So, I mean, there's an incentive structure in place to not lose the product by leakage. I mean, if you're, whatever business you're in, you don't want the product to be leaking everywhere. Our frustration is definitely the Texas perspective, because we have so many mid to small size producers who you don't have $30 million, or even something close to it, even to their scale. And so the question is this really the right approach when the industry does have an incentive already to capture these emissions? Are we, there's a bang for your buck kind of conversation there as a trade-off.
Yeah, this is what people need to understand. When you look at the marginal producers that you mentioned, what we call the stripper wells that produce less than 150 units of natural gas a day. For perspective, new shale wells that we drill are producing 10,000 to 20,000 units a day. But for the wells that are the stripper wells, they make up about 8 BCF a day. So about 8% of U.S. gas supply comes from these marginal producers. Yeah. Now, if you put regulations in place that makes it uneconomic for those wells to cease to exist, guess what? What happens? Well, I'll tell you what happens. That natural gas that was being used is going to be replaced with coal. Yeah. And the emissions associated with adding coal to the system, I can tell you, I don't think it's being factored in people's equations. They just think, this is something that's bad, let's cancel it. And unfortunately, there's unintended consequences. And doing that would actually increase global emissions, which runs counter to the goals. Our job as an industry is to make sure people understand the impacts of the decisions that they're making, and also being leaders and showing and doing everything we can to address people's concerns.
Yeah, that's why I love talking to you, because you frame this stuff in very very clear and concise ways, and especially for the audience that does care about the environment but also math. If you care about the environment and math, then you should listen to this podcast. I think those are both good things. There was one other, Clean Power Plan 2.0. Let's talk about that real quick, and then I'll let you go. This has been, so I'll explain what Clean Power Plan 2.0 is to people. This is something the EPA recently finalized. Again, this is not a bill that we passed. This is just EPA doing its thing. And we might see a stoppage to this kind of stuff if the Chevron deference decision gets overturned by the Supreme Court. But in the meantime, the EPA is running rampant, trying to destroy all the things we generally need, like you mentioned before: plastics, fossil fuels, fertilizer. Make it all more expensive so we can't have it. Don't let us build things. God forbid we build things to support a growing industry and population. Anyway, the Clean Power Plan 2.0 requires baseload natural gas plants to capture and sequester 90% of their CO2 emissions by 2032. How does is this realistic? I'm a big fan of carbon capture. I've passed bills to support the research into carbon capture, but I'm also realistic about where it is as a technology. What does this mean for the industry?
This is, I think, as backwards thinking as the LNG pause. Think about what the setup right now. We've got the President Biden, doing a lot of things to stimulate more electricity demand, whether that's the CHIPS Act, and encouraging more AI and the power demand that will consume,
EVs.
Or EVs. And so on one hand, we're increasing the demand for electricity. On the other hand, we're letting policies like this destroy our ability to make the electricity. And to quantify the impact for your viewers here, requiring carbon capture on coal and natural gas plants would basically render 60% of the power that gets generated every day and make it uneconomic. Now, what does that mean?
That's a
Does that
lot.
mean the gas is going to go away or the coal is going to go away? No. What that means is the American consumer, their power bills are going to increase 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
That's the reality. And I think
it'll be a mix, right? I think some things will go away because it's like we mentioned the stripper wells. Those will just go away. Nobody's going to buy those and make those more economic. You just lose 8%. So in the end, the price increases because if you lose supply, the price increases. So it's both, right? Like somebody's costs go up, they stay in business, they're gonna charge the consumer more, or they just go out of business.
Yeah.
And there's less supply on the market, and so prices go up. It's a terrible mix of both.
Yeah, people need to understand this. They see us out there fighting, and a lot of people say, Tobe, you're just fighting for your business. Well, understand,
yeah,
we're actually not fighting for our business. We're fighting for our customers, and that's the American people. And this ultimately is going to get into a place where, like, what is the cost of carbon on the average American? And people need to understand this. The average American uses about 16 tons, creates about 16 tons of emissions per year. So if you assume a price of carbon of $100 per ton, that means the average American is going to pay a $1,600 tax per year for carbon. Now, to put this in perspective, we go crazy as Americans when gasoline goes up $1 a gallon.
Yeah.
And for perspective, the average American uses about 500 gallons of gasoline a year. So the outrage for gasoline going up $1 is really a $500 cost to Americans. You're talking with this carbon tax, a 3 times amount. And not only that, those costs just contained to your car for gasoline. This tax is going to be for all of the family members that ride in that car. And so it's not just going to be $1,500 per person. It's going to be $1,500 for every person in your family. If people could start understanding that these policies and procedures, they're not hurting the oil and gas companies. They're hurting the oil and gas customers, which is every single American. It's the only industry where I would say every single American uses our products. You can't say that with social media. You can't say that with GMO. You can't say that with a bunch of other things, but energy is something that everybody uses.
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. I mean, that's why I was like, yeah, you should support your company because your company supports the modern way of life for the American people. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. So yes, and we need to fight for it. I mean, God, the only good news about the pause on LNG exports is that they get very clearly goes away. If Biden gets reelected, I think it goes away as soon as he's, as soon as he's reelected. I think it's a total political scam. The problem is those deals didn't get made, right? So we lost like a year of actual of our own industry making deals that on exports and selling that to other countries. And well, those other countries are just going to buy it elsewhere, maybe from people we don't like very much. And it's just such a stupid policy on so many levels. It's deeply frustrating.
Yeah.
Uh,
And Dan, one other point I mean, if you think about just the competitive landscape, because I mean, we're competing with other countries here to provide the cheapest, most reliable, cleanest energy in the world. There's other options.
yeah.
But the amount of influence that this would increase give the United States on the world stage is going to be the thing that brings peace and prosperity. In other parts of
Energy's
the world.
everything. Why the whole world was focused on the Middle East for so long, and it's like, why? Well, because of oil. It doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I still don't want the Middle East in chaos, because chaos tends to beget more chaos, which tends to eventually reach us. But I like to be in a position where we've got the resources to be that powerhouse. And God, it's so easy. It's so easy to be successful in America. I mean, we're just blessed with so many specific structural benefits, geography, resources, a pretty stable constitutional framework that can't change all that much. I know it frustrates people, but in the end, the checks and balances generally play out okay. It's a pretty good deal, but can we stop trying to screw it up so bad? That's all I ask.
And what's really remarkable here that people need to understand, I mean, America has another dominant industry that has been a tremendous benefit to the US. And we're talking about our tech industry.
Yeah.
Well, that tech industry relies on energy. And with this new AI boom that's taking place right now,
Yeah.
they're going to require a tremendous amount of electricity. For the first time in decades, American power needs are going to increase significantly. But if these policies don't allow us to get the energy that our tech providers need, and they're not able to run full speed, win the AI race, the penalty is not just Americans are going to pay unnecessarily high energy prices. The penalty is China is going to win the AI race. Now, I don't know what the repercussions of that are. I don't want to find out.
Yeah,
We got to get serious about this, because it's not just our industry, it's all other industries, particularly right now, the tech industry.
Yeah, that's an important point. I'm not sure people who listen to my podcast religiously know this, because we've gone over it on the podcast. But the more advanced big tech you get, and especially AI, requires these massive, massive server farms to do the machine learning that creates the AI. It's also what makes it at least detectable. When we look at this is a whole other conversation, but when we look at having some sort of supervision over AI and not letting us go into Terminator 2 world with Skynet. The good news is you can't just create a crazy AI machine in your basement. You need serious equipment and a ton of energy. And yeah, I think that's lost on people. If you want this new future, and I think we all want better tech and better this and better that, then energy will always be at the bottom of that. And I would prefer that energy be as reliable as possible and as clean as possible. Natural gas is a pretty clear fit for that at the moment, until we get our act together on nuclear, like you said. So, Toby, we gotta run to the next one, but thanks for being on, my friend. It's always great to hear from you, and great to hear your perspective. You really lay this stuff out, I think, in a very clear headed way. So I appreciate that. Helps me with my talking points. That's for sure.
Thanks, buddy.